Hello YouTube, welcome back to the Card Combo Show with me, Chuck Billy, where I look at the weird and wonderful card combinations in the Final Fantasy TCG. Normally I do a theme every week, but I've decided to kind of drop that because it can be really limiting in what I can actually include in these videos, and sometimes it means I end up including one crap card with kind of crap things which aren't that great. So I'm just going to focus on cards that take my fancy, and often that means I get to look at some really juicy stuff like we've got in this week's episode. So the cards I'm looking at this week are Black Waltz 2 from Opus 16, Twilight Odin from Opus 5, Leon from Opus 15, Kefka from Opus 15, and finally Waltz from Opus 16. So first up we have Black Waltz 2. So it's a 3CP 7k fire forward with the text: when Black Waltz 2 is discarded from your hand due to an ability, choose one forward, deal 4,000 damage, and then pay 0, discard one drop Black Mage from your hand. When you do so, choose one forward your opponent controls, deal it 5,000 damage. So you can use its own ability to basically discard itself, and you would deal 9k to something, or 5k and 4k to something. So pretty good, and the Black Waltz engine is a nice little self-contained damage dealing shtick, and it's interesting because it is over 3 elements, but you can easily keep it in 2 and just force the other one into there. But lightning is kind of the must-have because you want the VV as well, which also retrieves a Black Mage from your break zone as well. But anyway, Zack. So this is a fun little combo. So at the end of each of your turns, choose one forward opponent controls. Discard one card from your hand. If you do so, deal it 5,000 damage. So as you can probably guess here, the play is you discard Black Waltz 2 from your hand, or it could be any of the Black Waltzes for that matter, because they all have the same text of when they're discarded from your hand, deal something 4k. So you would discard Black Waltz 2 through an ability, at which point you would then get to deal 4k to something, and then that also triggers Zack's ability to then deal something 5k. So by discarding one card, you've dealt something 9k, which is pretty good, to be honest. Now, Zack obviously is mandatory, so if you have a card in hand, you have to discard it at the end of your turn, which isn't amazing, but still, he's a pretty good card, and if you are running it alongside the other Black Waltzes, and you've got some recursion there, then probably worth doing. Palom. So Palom is a drop Black Mage, and there's actually a fair few drop Black Mages throughout, but most of them are in fire. So you've got Palom, obviously Vivi as well. The other Black Waltz 2 backup that is also a drop Black Mage as well. And you could maybe be running it if you wanted to just use it to discard fodder for this, but I wouldn't recommend it. But ultimately it means that you can end up discarding black backups as well. So, you know, there's always those good when you play them onto the field abilities, something like Palom dealing something 4k, which isn't huge, but it's enough to probably kill something, or you can combine it with Black Waltz and then discard and deal some more damage. Robel Akbel. So once again, it's also a drop Black Mage, but what's good about this is that Robel Akbel also has the trigger at the beginning of your main phase 1. During each of your turns, choose one backup in your break zone, add it to your hand. So remember how I just said that there's some decent Black Mage backups? You can discard it to deal damage to something, and then you get it back to hand with Robel, and you can just keep on rinsing and repeating. Go-Go. So you discard a Black Mage, you deal something 5k, perfectly fine. Now the one problem here is the fact that Go-Go doesn't require you to make the same payment, he just copies it, but you still need to discard a Black Mage, which isn't amazing because you still have to, you know, it's basically discarding 2 Black Mages, but it's 2 instances of 5k, which is a reasonable amount, and Go-Go is in Ice, which means it can work alongside the Ice Black Waltz 1, I believe. So there is still that. Now, discarding 2 to deal 9k to something, it's the same as kind of casting a Fire Summon, I guess, but it could be different pockets of damage, and ultimately you aren't required to anyway, so you could pay the 0 and technically not discard something, at which point, yeah, why would you have done it in the first place? But still, it is there regardless. Ash. So, at the beginning of your attack phase, during each of your turns, select up to 2 of the following actions. Draw one card, then discard one card from hand. Another way to make you discard something, you discard Black Waltz 1, 2, or 3 from your hand, deal something of 5k, which if you combine that alongside maybe something losing its ability, sorry, that's 4k, not 5k, something losing its ability, or does all your forwards gaining, or your water forwards, sorry, gaining plus 1,000, it means that you may be able to push damage or hopefully kill something. Puppet Master. So it's a lightning, so it's in the right element, and it's from the right opus as well. But when Puppet Master enters field, you may discard one card, so a Black Waltz. When you do so, choose one character in your break zone, add it to your hand. So you can discard a Black Mage to then trigger the discarded card's effect to deal 4k something, to then get a Black Waltz back to hand, or Black Mage back to hand, to then discard again through Black Waltz's ability. So a nice way just to be able to deal lots of pockets of small amounts of damage. Right, Twilight Odin. So he's a 4 CP lightning monster with the ability Pay 1 Lightning. Until the end of the turn, Twilight Odin also becomes a forward with 7,000 power, and when Twilight Odin deals damage to your opponent, choose one forward your opponent controls, break it. You can only use this ability once per turn. So that ability is in reference to making a monster. You just basically means you can't keep making a monster. But it's a little under curve, because it becomes a 7,000 power forward, and you also have to pay a lightning as well for it to become a forward, which means that really you're paying 5 CP for a 7k forward. However, being able to deal damage to a forward, deal damage to your opponent and then just break a forward, an unrestricted break, doesn't matter, is actually pretty powerful. So something like Go-Go is really good, because if you make Twilight Odin a forward with 7k power and break something when deal damage, Go-Go will do the same. So now you have 2 forwards, which when they attack and deal damage to your opponent, you get to choose a forward your opponent controls and break it, which is a lot to take on board. Now, Go-Go doesn't gain a power buff, which doesn't matter, but it does mean that you can ultimately just break forwards willy-nilly. And if you are in, Lightning or Ice, Snow, Alcid, both work very nicely. So, yeah, Alcid. Now, unfortunately, Alcid doesn't bring in Twilight Odin, but it does mean that you can also freeze something when Alcid comes in, but then play Alcid to play something else, I don't know, probably Zeramus. You attack with Twilight Odin, you now get to dull something out of the way, deal a point of damage, break said forward, hopefully. Zeramus, so obviously Zeramus always gets played with Alcid, but the play here is the fact that you've got Zeramus on the field and Twilight Odin. Your opponent now has the problem of, if they pass their turn, all their forwards then go dull, at which point Twilight Odin will attack, deal your opponent a point of damage, and then one of their forwards breaks anyway. So do they attack? But if you've got some bigger forwards as well, maybe something with first strike, then they're also kind of screwed on that front as well. So realistically, it just puts your opponent into a impossible situation. Right, Snow, so basically the same as Alcid, yeah, I get it, but just being able to put yourself into ice as well to constantly dull things out of the way and keep things frozen is really useful. But the combo here isn't just Twilight Odin and Snow, it's also Mecha Chocobo. So this is a card that hasn't been played since like Opus 4, but having 2 forwards that can attack and break stuff, but also dulling out your opponent's forwards is really good. Now, Mecha Chocobo can only break a dull forward, of course, 4 or less your opponent controls, but that's still a large portion of forwards. And yeah, so let's say you attack with Twilight Odin, you dull out your opponent's forward, deal them a point of damage, break a forward, you then attack with Mecha Chocobo. Again, they don't have a forward to block with, you can then break another forward as well. So, I mean, generally, if you have Snow on your backup lineup, your opponent's going to be very wary of having forwards dull. But, again, you're an ice, so you can dull them out of the way. Anyway, and something that Ice Lightning kind of lacks, but does actually have, is outright break. And things like Twilight Odin and Mecha Chocobo are good ways to be able to get that. Chelinka, so, I mean, it can attack twice, hopefully deal your opponent 2 points of damage and break 2 of their forwards. Might be something I don't expect. Now, again, you're in Wind Lightning, so the chance of you running haste is pretty high, and if your opponent does leave that open, then they shouldn't have. But running Chelinka alongside something like the Dark Zeramus backup as well, making it so that Twilight Odin cannot be blocked, attacks twice, breaks 2 forwards, jobs are good. And finally, Ravana, Savior of the Nath. So you could attack with Ravana, the opponent doesn't block because obviously they don't want to. You attack with Twilight Odin and, they could block it, and if they do, then Twilight Odin will probably die, but if they don't, you get to break one of their forwards, at which point Ravana stands back up, can attack again. So a nice little way to hopefully be able to get 3 points of damage through and break one of your opponent's forwards as well. Right, Leon. So a 3 CP 7k Wind Forward. When a forward of cost 10,000 power or more you control attacks, draw 1 card. And then damage 3, when Leon enters the field, choose 1 card named Maria in your break zone, play it onto the field. Generally played along with the Warrior Rebel engine, but he does have some decent plays on his own as well, and it's probably the forward that stands out on his own the best in that kind of engine anyway. So Heretical Knight Garland. Being able to use Heretical Knight Garland to make anything huge, I mean, provided it's 6k or more, it then becomes 10k in Brave or more. They attack, you get to draw a card. Simple as, really. Gilgamesh. So if Gilgamesh has 10,000 power or more, Gilgamesh gains Brave and can attack twice in the same turn. He also gains 1,000 power for each Gilgamesh in your break zone, but again, you can use various different ways to be able to buff him. But yeah, can attack twice when it's at 10,000 power, means you get to draw 2 cards off of Leon. Chelinka. So yeah, just being able to make it so that any forward of 10,000 power or more can attack twice. Just pretty good, to be honest. I mean, you could even theoretically play Chelinka onto the field, then use something like Althea to put Chelinka back in your hand, then replay Chelinka to make it sound you've got 2 forwards that can both attack twice. Maybe you've also got Gilgamesh, so you know you can attack 6 times. It's stupid. But, you know, either way, being able to draw lots of cards and attack at the same time is quite nice. Aerith, another really good card to be able to push all your forwards up, and if you're running Aerith and, I don't know, say the card whose name I've forgotten, Maria. How can I forget it? It's literally written there. The Maria, which also buffs your Warrior Rebels as well, would be pretty good. And you do have the Earth Furion as well, who would also gain plus 1,000 and Brave, I believe, from having another Rebel on the field. So yeah, just being able to make all these forwards become huge and attack and draw you cards is a lot of fun. Tidus. So this is... I mean, you've got Tidus and then you've got Rain, and they can attack, and whilst Rain also reduces your forwards' power, this is actually kind of almost an example of why this doesn't work. So let's say you've also got a forward on your field which is buffing all your forwards by, or let's say you've got Aerith on the field, and then you attack with Tidus. Tidus now becomes an 11k forward. However, you will not draw a card off of Leon's effect, because Leon will check at the point of attack, is it 10,000 power? No? Then don't stack his effect to draw a card. You will stack Tidus's effect to be able to buff everything, at which point that resolves, then he is over 10,000 power. But Leon checks at the attack, it's not 10k, doesn't get the effect. But even still, you can attack with Tidus, that buffs all your other forwards, at which point, when they attack, hopefully they're 10k or more, at which point you can draw more cards. Soul. So Soul is a example of probably doing it a better way around rather than something like Rain or Tidus, which is just pay a crystal, all the forwards you control gain plus 2,000 power until the end of the turn. So nice. Just more ways to be able to buff all your forwards and in a different element as well. So it might be a nice way to be able to do that. Now you combine that with something like the Opus 16 Ramza as well, which can attack a couple of times and also becomes huge. You get to draw multiple cards again, but this time in fire. Boonivels, I love this card. So the cost required to cast Boonivels is reduced by 2 for each backup of a different element you control other than multi-element. So if you run Shantoto, that doesn't count towards it at all. And then at damage 3, Boonivels gains Brave, and Boonivels can attack twice in the same turn. So that's already pretty good. And then at damage 6, when Boonivels attacks, choose one character, break it. So if you're 6 and you've got Leon and Boonivels in the field, and you attack twice with Boonivels, you get to break 2 things. You've got 2 huge 10k attacks happening, and you also get to draw 2 cards, which is really good. And it's not to mention that you will be in Earthwind as well, so Boonivels will only cost you 6, which 6 CP for a 10k forward is pretty good. And finally, Maria, because Leon can play any Maria. It doesn't matter if it's a forward, backup, monster, whatever. You play Leon onto the field, play Maria from your break zone, you then get a standard buff of 1,000 on all your forwards. Right, Kefka. So a 4 CP 8k Earth forward with the text EX Burst. When Kefka enters the field, gain a crystal, and then pay 3 crystals. Divide all the forwards your opponent controls into 3 groups. You can make a group of 0 forwards. Your opponent selects one group among them, put all the forwards of the other groups into the break zone. So it is a weird, janky mess of an ability, but actually quite powerful. So if your opponent does have 4 forwards, you can put 2 forwards together, 1 forward, and then another forward. At which point your opponent will probably put the 2 groups, which contain 1 forward each, so they get to retain 2 forwards. But what's really strong about Kefka is the fact that those forwards aren't broken, they are put into the break zone, which even if your opponent has forwards that cannot be broken due to summons or abilities, they're not being broken, they're just simply being put into the break zone. So Realm, they're talking mostly about crystal generation here. So Realm is one of the most reliable ways to be able to gain crystals, which is kind of strange. But yeah, you can play Realm onto the field to then bounce herself if you really want to, gain a crystal. Given the fact that Kefka also gains a crystal upon entry, you could play Realm, bounce her back to hand, play Realm again, gain another crystal, and then potentially use Kefka's ability. Now that is 6 CP you've paid for 2 crystals, which isn't fantastic, and there are cheap ways to do it, but when needs must. Water actually has quite a few different ways of being able to gain crystals. Sarah Mobius, for example, as well. Or you could just play Umaro onto the field, and you don't pay a crystal, so then he gets put from the field into the break zone, and then you gain a crystal from that. So 1 CP for a crystal isn't too bad as well. But with Realms, you can bounce anything, so it's as long as a forward or a monster. So, I mean, the generic play is you make the water thing, I can't remember what it's called now, worm? I can't remember, whatever, but yeah, the monster which would break at the end of the turn. You hopefully get an attack with that, and then you go to main phase 2, you play Realm to bounce it back to hand, or just bounce any monster back to hand that has a good entry effect. And yeah, just rinse and repeat basically. Agrias. So, Agrias obviously attacks, you gain a crystal. And that's actually pretty good, to be honest. Now, Agrias has this horrible effect of, when Agrias is chosen by your opponent summons abilities, your opponent discards 1 card from their hand. And also, if you control a category FFT character other than Agrias, Agrias gains plus 3000 power. So you could, for example, be running the Duke Larg, the Ice Buffer, at which point Agrias becomes a 9k forward, which is huge. Now, you play Kefka onto the field, you gain a crystal. Agrias then attacks, you gain a 2nd crystal. So realistically, your opponent has a very limited time before Kefka can use his ability. Only 1 more turn, in fact. And this is obviously on the basis that Agrias can attack, but nobody ever wants to target Agrias because they have to discard a card. Now, if having these 2 on the field means that your opponent does eventually have to get rid of Agrias to then end up discarding a card anyway, that's probably worth it. You could also run Charlotte alongside this as well, so it means your opponent has to get rid of Charlotte first before they can get rid of Agrias or Kefka, which is just a nightmare, really. But what's also funny about this is the fact that, yeah, so let's say Agrias attacks, you gain a crystal, you play Kefka onto the field, you then gain a 2nd crystal. Your opponent has 1 turn to be able to get rid of him, because the 2nd time you attack with Agrias, before your opponent can even block, you attack with Agrias, you gain your 3rd crystal, and then you use those 3 crystals to use Kefka's ability and break most of your opponent's forwards before they even get a chance to block. Nasty. Atomos. So another summon that can just put something into the break zone. So use Kefka to put most of your opponent's forwards into the break zone, at which point you then cast Atomos to then put their final forward into the break zone. Obviously, if you do make a group of more than 1, that's probably the group they're going to choose, but even still, casting Atomos to then probably get rid of that forward, or one of those forwards anyway, is good. And you might find, generally when you put 2 forwards into a group together, they'll be the 2 weakest forwards, so they're not as enticed to play that. But if your opponent knows the deck, then they might do that anyway. But still, being able to make it so that your opponent puts all their forwards into the break zone is very strong. Snow. So this is a fun little combo, because the fact that when you play something like Snow, your opponent wants to play lots of forwards, because 1 forward can attack and dole something out the way, at which point they'll probably want to play 2 or 3 forwards. But having something like Kefka on the field means that they don't want you to be able to use this ability, at which point they then don't want to play lots of forwards. So they're in very much a catch-22 situation, because they've got Kefka ready to wipe most of their field, and then you've got Snow. So they're going to ultimately look for means to be able to get rid of Kefka first before they play more forwards. Cecil. So when Cecil enters the field, you may play 1 character across 4 or less from your hand onto the field. I don't really care about that. When 1 or more characters you control are chosen by your opponent's summons or abilities, if your opponent doesn't pay 2, cancel their effects. So just having nice protection on your forwards and your characters and Kefka as well is just super useful, because your opponent's gonna want to get rid of your Kefka to stop it from using its abilities before they play more forwards, similar with Snow. But if they then have to pay to get the effects off anyway, and then because you're on Earth, you might have something like, I don't know, Mist Dragon. So say they cast a summon, they try to target Kefka, they then have to pay to, and then you cast Mist Dragon anyway to cancel that, or maybe they didn't realise that you've just got a Lail open. That then reduces their ability to be able to get rid of Kefka, and they still need to be able to play forwards, otherwise Kefka and Cecil are probably going to be swinging through. and Bartz, funnily enough. So Bartz is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to gain crystals, because all you've got to do is play a Warrior of Light onto the field, other than Bartz, and you gain a crystal. Simple as that. And Warriors of Lights, if you've seen any of my Warrior Light focused videos, they can just swarm so quickly, and it's a lot of fun. But moreover, Warrior of Lights are also in Earth as well, so you could go for an Earth-Fire mix if you wanted, and just throw Bartz in for the giggles, because Fire does have the means of playing Bartz without actually having to run Wind. You could also run Wind as well, but realistically there isn't a huge amount of Warrior Lights outside of Bartz. Maybe Arc if you really wanted to. Water is obviously one of the best elements for it as well, because you've got lots of means of being able to play things from your break zone and whatnot. But ultimately you can play lots of forwards onto the field, which obviously then demands that your opponent play lots of forwards onto the field because they don't want to get overrun. But then you use Kefka's ability to remove most of the forwards anyway, or sorry, break most of the forwards. Not even break, put into the break zone, you know what I'm trying to say. But yeah, Bartz is a really easy way to be able to gain crystals to then use for Kefka's ability whilst also swarming the field. Just be mindful of any board wipes your opponent might have. And then finally we have Wall from Opus 16. There's a 5 CP 9k wind forward, and the cost required to cast Wall is reduced by 1 for each character of cost 5 or more you control. It cannot become 0. And then the forwards of cost 5 or more other than Wall you control gain. This forward cannot be chosen by opponent's summoners abilities. When you cast a character of 5 or more, draw 1 card. This effect will only trigger once per turn. So he's got a lot going on, but basically he protects all your big forwards. He can become cheaper, and he'll also draw you cards. Not too bad. Guy. So let's say you've already got Wall onto the field. You could then play Guy, who will then search you a Rebel of cost 3s and play it onto the field, which generally will be the Yosef backup, which will then search your Rebel to then add that to hand. And yeah, like I said, if Wall is on the field, then you also get to draw a card, which is really good. And if not, you can then play Wall onto the field for a reduced cost because of Guy being huge. But even better is that Wall does fit into the Warrior Rebel engine because he's in Wind. Got a slow fade on there, sorry. Lock. So Lock obviously becomes really cheap the more things you cast in a turn, and being able to play Lock for like 2 CP with Wall on the field means that you basically recur his cost immediately. If you're running something like a Tomos as well, and Lock just happens to be, actually no, he would be your second cast, because of the fact that the Tomos needs that, but then he wouldn't cost 2, so never mind, ignore me. But ultimately, you would play Lock onto the field, hopefully for 2, maybe 4, maybe 6. You still get to draw a card off of Wall, but also Lock is a really cheap forward to be able to play onto the field, which then might also reduce Wall's cost as well. Vanille. So when Vanille enters the field, you can get 2 forwards in your break zone, add them back to your hand, and if Wall's already on the field, you then get another card to hand as well. So Vanille has effectively cost you nothing except for herself. Arden. This is funny. So you can play Arden onto the field with Wall on the field, and before you triggers Arden's effect, or you can have it so that Arden triggers first, and then Wall triggers second, at which point Wall will then resolve first, get you a card to hand, and then that'll be 1 extra card discarded with Arden to then get even more of his effects off. Now obviously Arden isn't an amazing card, but if it's late gameplay, it's kind of funny. And I mean, you don't really want Arden to have any protection from Wall anyway, because it's the sort of card that once he's been played, he's a one and done. And you probably don't want to be replaying him. If you're running 2 Ardens, then that is a hell of a deck. But either way, it's still a fun little play. Noctis. So the cost required to cast Noctis is reduced by 1 for each category 15 character you control. No stipulation that it cannot become 0, so Noctis can be free. You play Noctis onto the field for free, you get to draw a card, probably something else, and you get to play that. Now the one problem here is the fact that there isn't really any 15 characters in Wind outside of Iris at the moment. However, this is me looking forward in time. I do believe that in the 15 decks coming out at some point later in 2022, there is actually a 15 themed Wind Lightning deck, I believe, which would be pretty cool. So, or it might be Lightning as Earth, I don't know. Either way, there will be more 15 Wind characters, hopefully, at which point that may be able to play Wall into this a bit more. So, but still, be able to play Noctis onto the field for cheaps, and still having him protected because he has a fantastic ability. this 15 characters disappearing or entering and dulling stuff out of the way. It's crazy. But yeah, really strong. Machina. So if the number of characters your opponent controls is greater than the number of characters you control, the cost required plus Machina is reduced by 2. So you can play Machina onto the field for 3, at which point you get to draw a card if Wall is already there. Machina is also a really good card in my opinion in Fire because he deals 4k on attack and Brave if you have 2 or less forwards. So if your 2 forwards are Wall and Machina, Machina is pretty strong and he's got the protection there of Wall anyway, and Wind Fire can do a lot of board-wide damage, so not a bad pairing to be honest. Vayne. Now this is a fun little pair. So all the forwards you control gain at the end of your turn. If you don't pay 1, break this forward. So it means that your opponent has to get rid of Wall before they can get rid of Vayne, and there's a couple of ways you could do it. You could play Vayne first and then play Wall. So Wall would then obviously cost you a bit less, but that's still a lot. You could already have Wall on the field and then play Vayne, at which point you get to draw a card. Now you combine this with Cecil, now you have a horrible situation for your opponent because basically they need to be able to get rid of Wall before they can get rid of Vayne, but when they do so, they then have to pay 2. If they don't, then it gets cancelled. But let's say they do manage to pay 2 and it gets rid of Wall and they pay 2. They then need to try and get rid of Vayne, but they still have to pay 2. And that's a lot of cost, and this is assuming that you don't have something in hand to then actually save Vayne from dying. They then have to, in their turn, if they don't, get rid of Vayne, they have to pay 1, otherwise all their forwards will break. So, yeah. Now, obviously, this is a pretty hefty field, but you could already have Cecil and Vayne on the field, and you play Wall for only 3, which is a nice little form of protection. Just be mindful of board wipes again, I guess. And there we go, folks. I want to give a massive shout out to Square Enix and the Brotherhood Games in London for the UK's Re-Raise event that happened at the end of May. It was so much fun and really, really good. Congratulations to all the winners. And also the second day, the Singletons decks, or I can't remember what it was actually probably called, but that was so much fun. Yeah, it was great to meet some of you guys there as well. That was fantastic. To be honest, I was a little kind of shocked because I didn't think anyone would actually come up to me and be like, oh, let's Jacob Billy. But yeah, it was really, really cool, and your support means all the world to me. So thank you ever so much. Here's to many more episodes of the Card Combo Show, eh? Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. Stay safe, be lucky, and I'll see you at the next event.